Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Steadfast and Loyal podcast. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Alan West.
You gotta light 'em up before they burn it down. Better dig deep and put 'em in the ground. Blood on their hands, they're hellbound. Save us all. Ooh, they're gonna burn it down. Save us all before they burn it down.
Our second podcast episode, we talked about religious freedom. And we had three incredible pastors, one of which was mine own, that was with us. And I talked about this whole issue of the Black Robe Regiment. You know, once upon a time during the Revolutionary War, we had pastors, we had ministers, we had reverends that came down out of the pulpit and fought beside the men to make sure that we could have freedom in the United States of America. Well, one morning I was out for a run and God kind of tapped me on the head while I'm running uphill. I don't know why he always chooses when I'm running uphill to have a conversation, but he gave me an idea about how we can restore the Black Robe Regiment here in the United States of America. So what we're going to do here through the Steadfast and Loyal podcast, in conjunction with My Faith Votes, my dear friend Jason Yates, I'm a national spokesperson for that 501c3 organization. We're going to look every month for two pastors that are indicative of that spirit of the Black Robe Regiment. And what you can do is you can submit a nomination of your pastor to a website, email address, Tomahawk at abwshow.com. Why? Because if they are selected, and we're only selecting two per month, people, they will get this tomahawk that I will have done for them by IST in laser engraving, David Storts of Belle Plaine, Kansas. And on one side, you will have the pastor's name that was there on the handle. And then here you will see this incredible laser engraving of a Revolutionary War reverend carrying his Bible there with the cross on it. And of course, the words, the Black Robe Regiment. And then on the other side, you will have engraved the Black Robe Regiment, and you will see this verse, 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 2 through 5, and the Lion of Judah that is there, the lion's face within the cross. And what does it say in 2 Timothy chapter 4, 2 through 5? Preach the word, be prepared in season and out of season, correct, rebuke, and encourage with great patience and careful instruction. For the time will come when the people will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. They will turn their ears away from the truth and turn aside to myths. But you, keep your head in all situations, endure hardship, do the work of an evangelist, discharge all the duties of your ministry. The first three who will receive this Black Robe Regiment Tomahawk, designed and created by David Storts of Belle Plaine, Kansas. My pastor at Sojourn Church here in Carrollton, Texas, Pastor Chris McCrae, Pastor Dana Coverstone of Kentucky, and a dear friend, and that's Doug Giles, who lives down in the Dripping Springs area here in Texas. But what we want you to do is start thinking about if your pastor is indicative of what it says in 2 Timothy 4, 2 through 5, nominate your pastor, he or she, at tomahawk at abwshow.com. Only two per month. I will continue to do this until I am no longer breathing on this earth to raise up the Black Robe Regiment here with the spirit of the tomahawk. Because I think we need warrior pastors once again to stand up against what we see happening here in the United States of America, where you have a pastor that was out there reading from the Bible in Seattle, Washington. And he was arrested just for reading the Bible. He was accosted verbally, physically, just for reading God's word. The very first right that we have, the very first liberty that we have is the freedom of religion and the free exercise thereof. The Supreme Court had to make a decision in the Kennedy case that a coach could take a knee and just lift up a solemn prayer, not coerce anyone, not ask anyone to join him, just lift up a solemn prayer. That's why we need the new Black Robe Regiment, who will go by 2 Timothy 4, 2 through 5. And see underneath, you will have the number of your sequence and the year that you received your Black Robe Regiment Tomahawk. The first three, Pastor Chris McRae, Pastor Dana Coverstone, and Doug Giles. And now for the month of August, we'll be looking to your nominations to select the next two. This is important. We need to have the pastors, the men of God, the Black Robe Regiment that preach the word in season and out. And stop going to churches where you're looking for pastors that just tickle your itching ears and tell you what you want to hear instead of what you need to hear. Now, tonight's podcast, we're going to talk about what the people need to hear. Because another one of those First Amendment rights that we have in the United States of America is the freedom of press. And I've often said that the progressive socialist left in America, they do not believe in the three branches of government. Heck, I don't think some of them even know what the three branches of government are. The executive, legislative, and judicial. And of course, Article 1 of the Constitution is the legislative branch. It lays out their duties and responsibilities. Article 2 is the executive branch. It lays out their duties and responsibilities. Article 3 is the judicial branch, lays out their duties and responsibilities. Right now, you've got the executive and legislative branches attacking the judicial branch because the judicial branch is finally doing what they're supposed to do as a constitutionally based court. Now, the left wants it to be packed, dissolved, impeached, whatever. And when I think about how if you turn on certain news media outlets in the United States of America, you see one story, but then you turn to others, and it's like you're living in an alternative universe. Because, see, the left believes in the three branches of rule. And the three branches of rule are the media, academia, and the courts. And they're upset right now. Like I say, they're in an apoplectic meltdown rage because they believe they've lost control of the Supreme Court. They no longer can implement their ideological agenda and will through a courtstitution because we're getting back to the Constitution. And so how do you enable that messaging, that narrative? You got to control the media. And what do we see happen? The reason why they are able to control the media, because most of these schools of communication and all these colleges and universities are left-leaning. And so we're raising the next generation of little leftist propagandists who go out there and, if you want to talk about the real collusion, the collusion between the Democrat National Party, the progressive socialist, leftist, Marxists, communists, and the media. I mean, it's funny, tragedy happened in Illinois with this deranged individual who shot up a 4th of July, an Independence Day parade, just the same as the deranged individual. There was a Black Lives Matter supporter that drove an SUV through a Christmas Day parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin, but you didn't hear a lot about that on the mainstream media. The individual that was led out just not too long before, driving the same vehicle for which he used to threaten a woman, he drove it through a Christmas Day parade. Didn't see or hear a lot about that. Now, as more truth comes out about this shooter here in Highland Park, Illinois, will we hear a lot about that if it does not fit the narrative of the progressive socialist left? So we have got to get into this, and we've got to understand that we want a free press, but we don't want an ideological press. We don't want a Pravda here in the United States of America. We don't want a media that is not telling us what needs to be said. They're not reporting the news. And some of y'all may remember, I'm kind of dating myself now. I remember Huntley Brinkley. They just reported the news. And you got to decide. And Walter Cronkite kind of got off the ranch when he started to, be on the side of the leftist agenda when it came to the war in Vietnam and reporting the Tet Offensive, not as a victory for us, but as a victory for the North Vietnamese Army and the Viet Cong. And General Giap will tell you that was a turning point. When they realized that they could use the American media for their own sake, that was a turning point in the Vietnam War. So we've got some individuals tonight that we're going to delve into this thing about how can conservatives make sure that their voices are heard in the media space in the United States of America? How can we make sure that we get truth out there? Now, there are some people on the conservative side. They are opinion writers and editors, and they have opinion shows. There's no doubt about it. But still, in that, they are dealing with facts. You look at the rage that the left went into after the Dobbs case decision, which overturned the Roe v. Wade decision. The leftist media completely blew the explanation of that. Why? Why can't you just tell the truth about what the decision was about? Why can't you tell the truth and refer back to the Constitution and talk about where this decision should have been? Why can't you get people to understand that the Supreme Court of the United States of America does not make rights, and that this whole thing about murdering an unborn baby in the womb was never an enumerated right? It was never articulated in the Constitution. And if you want to change the Constitution of the United States of America, there's an amendment process that you have to go through. It is not a court that amends the Constitution. But why do certain media outlets choose not to tell that truth to the American people? I was very proud to have my flags up for Independence Day. Not just my flagpole, but I had additional flags throughout. But now all of a sudden, if you are carrying, waving, wearing an American flag, you're being castigated, denigrated, disparaged, demeaned as a racist or something along those lines. There are some, even in the United States of America, do not believe that the United States was founded on July the 4th of 1776. That's not our Independence Day. The United States of America was founded in 1619. So why would people even allow that type of disturbing thought and commentary to be out there? So we're going to have a discussion about one of the three branches of rule of the progressive socialist left, and that's the media. Tonight, we have on Buck Sexton, who is the host of the Buck Sexton Show. We have on Josh Hammer, who is an opinion editor of Newsweek, a research fellow with the Edmund Burke Foundation. And we have Jack Posobiec, who is the senior editor of Human Events, one of the nation's oldest conservative outlets, founded in 1944. Because when I look at these young men and women out there as well, they're the ones who are going to make sure that we protect and preserve the longest running constitutional republic that the world has ever known, because they will ensure that truth is what gets out into the marketplace, not the distorted lies and ideological agenda of the progressive socialist left. We'll be right back. The very first Black Robe Regiment Tomahawk will go to our pastor, Pastor Chris McCrae. Here is his name. Here you see a Revolutionary War pastor carrying a Bible, Black Robe Regiment, and on this side is the Lion of Judah and the cross, and it says 2 Timothy chapter 4, 2-5. Preach the word in season and out. Pastor Chris, please come and accept your Tomahawk. Hey, welcome back to the Steadfast and Loyal podcast. And as promised, our guest tonight is Buck Sexton, the host of the Buck Sexton Show. Each day on the national radio program, he discusses the news, information, and events that matter most to the daily lives of Americans, from business and politics to entertainment and social issues. He shares his candid, passionate takes on the latest local, national, and global headlines and welcomes a variety of guests and experts. Buck previously served as a CIA officer in the Counterterrorism Center and in the Office of Iraq Analysis. He completed tours of duty as an intelligence officer in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as other hot spots around the globe, and led intelligence briefings for senior U.S. officials, including President George W. Bush, Vice President Dick Cheney. Sexton also served in the New York Police Department, NYPD Intelligence Division, working on counterterrorism and counter-radicalization issues, and he is a native of New York City. Buck, thanks so much for joining us and being here on the Steadfast and Loyal podcast.
Alan, honored to be with you, man. Thank you for having me.
This is a great thing. You know, as we were chatting before we came on air, you know, the monologue today was about the First Amendment, freedom of the press. But yet the left, I don't think they believe in the three branches of the government. They believe in the three branches of rule: media, academia, and the courts. And right now they're in an apoplectic meltdown because they think that they're losing control on the courts and they can't implement their ideological agenda. But what we see happening is a media that does not want to report and tell the truth. You want to talk about the real collusion. It's not Russia and Donald Trump, it's the media and the DNC. Your perspective.
Well, look, I think anybody who is paying attention and being honest about it would have to say that what we often refer to as the mainstream media, I prefer to call it the Democrat corporate media, because I agree with those who say, why give them the unearned title of mainstream, right? It's not like there was some vote where all of a sudden NPR we decided was what was mainstream. No, these are corporate media outlets that have, stretching back for decades now, been run by and for the benefit of the Democrat Party and the left. And I think what we've seen is efforts to consolidate as much power, as much cultural and information dissemination power as possible by these left-wing entities, not by persuading even internally in the companies. I'm not thinking of social media, major corporations, but, you know, Alan, they realize all they have to do is seize the HR department, and then so much of the rest will follow. You know, I know you're a student of history, particularly military history, and the enemies that we faced. I think a lot of Americans forget that there was a time when the Soviet Union had commissars, political officers, that they embedded everywhere in military units, in what went for media, you know, newspapers and radio at the time, down to the factories, down to the local shops and stores. They had someone whose only job was to make sure, and it really was their job, to make sure that you spouted the party line, you didn't criticize the government, and if you did, you disappear, you get sent to a gulag, and that was the reality of life in living memory for a whole lot of people. So we have a version of the commissar today, Alan, but it's the woke HR police, and also just the entities, as you mentioned, some of the media entities that I think view their role not so much as informing, but as policing speech and limiting debate and free expression as much as possible. It's perverse that the media does that, but they do.
You know, it's amazing to me. And when you go back and you look at the Obama administration and some of the things that they did toward the media, I'm thinking about James Rosen, where they went after him. But, you know, yet when it comes to them being in power, they're not looking for anyone to hold them accountable or responsible whatsoever. And I go back and think about, you and I were in Afghanistan. And when Joe Biden steps up to the podium and completely changes the narrative while we have this debacle going on, and it becomes mandated vaccines. And that's the story. And there is no more talk about what is happening in Afghanistan. There's no more talk about the 13 Marines, a sailor and a soldier who lost their life there. So you would think that at least in national security and foreign policy issues, it wouldn't be ideological, but they have taken over that aspect as well.
Alan, I can't remember who first said it, but it's been circulating for quite some time among us conservatives. And it's the notion that for the left, and I have to say, I think the left used to be a faction within the Democrat Party, and now it's really the vanguard. So not all Democrats are leftists, but the leftists are actually now running the Democrat Party, which is different than what we had before. I would argue that that's a transformation that really began under Obama and has really accelerated over the last few years, in particular under Donald Trump. But I think that the phrase that I want to mention was that for Democrats, for leftists, they have no enemies abroad, only enemies at home. I don't know if you recognize that quote, but it's true.
It is.
They view even external foreign policy challenges now as first and foremost a function of the ability to maintain and wield power domestically. And that is, partisanship stops at our borders, or at the nation's edge, or variations on other phrases. That's not true, obviously, and hasn't been true for quite some time now. And it's disconcerting, but I do think that part of the leftist project is, and which again runs the Democrat Party now, is whether you're talking about foreign policy goals, or you're talking about sports, or you're talking about health policy, everything must be politicized now. They insist on the politicization of all things through a partisan lens. And we see the results of that all around us, I think, all the time.
It's funny you bring that up, because at the beginning of this week, we saw Secretary Mayorkas go on one of the Sunday news programs. And here's a guy that actually, without cracking a smile or anything, looked at the camera and said, we're doing real good on the border. Now, I don't know what parallel universe he lives in, but the fact that he is not challenged on that, 3 million people have come across the border illegally in just a year and a half, 800,000 getaways, people we don't even know. Is there no pride? Is there no shame with the leftists that, as you have said, have taken over this outlet? Are they so focused on the purposeful and intentional undermining of the sovereignty of the United States that the truth does not matter to them?
Well, Alan, it all depends on what the actual goals are, right? I mean, you're approaching this. I think Mayorkas thinks he is doing a fantastic job. And you see that, and you say, well, that's crazy, because the border is a sieve. It's almost a de facto open border, and the fentanyl and the illegals and all the things that are just, and the cartels. The cartel is the most powerful transnational criminal organization on the planet right now.
Absolutely.
And all that's going on. You and I sit here and say, well, that's clearly failure, right? Well, it all depends on what your priorities are.
Yeah, I guess this Machiavellian, the ends justify the means, and we know what their means are. But how can these people in the media sit there and with a straight face, I guess, and say, hey, it's fine. Border czar Kamala Harris, who's never been to the border, everything's cool. Laugh it off.
I think, Alan, it leads us back to the same point, same place. You and I sit here, and your audience watching is sitting at home thinking, we're supposed to have a border that's secure. We're supposed to have rule of law. So clearly the destruction of that rule of law is bad, right? So that's how we approach this. Whether you're talking about Mayorkas or the Biden administration or the members of the media that see this and don't challenge it, they don't view it as bad. The only thing they view as bad is the American people learning about it and understanding what's really going on there, because it's a threat to their power in the short term. Their mission, I think, and you see this more openly now from Democrats than ever before, is to create a state of so much bureaucratic chaos and effectively legal anarchy at the border that you always have this ongoing flood of illegals into the country, with the idea that over time, this tilts the electoral map, I should say, and various elections in the Democrat camp. They're playing a numbers game, and they figure that illegals will either eventually be made everyone who says they won't get the right to vote, the moment they're permanently legalized through an amnesty, the next move will be the Democrats giving them the right to vote.
Yeah.
But also, of course, there'll be more states like California and New York, my own state, that want to treat them as de facto legal. And they're even trying to give them the right to vote in local elections here. That just got slapped down in New York. So they view this as a power play. So yeah, you and I sit here and say, how can the media not challenge it? Well, Alan, it's because media is actually quietly rooting for this too. They don't want to talk about the border. The border, as you and I know, 70% of the country thinks illegal immigration is a problem and is a bad thing. And those aren't numbers Democrats can win with. So they don't want people talking about it.
So that transitions to this point. You, without a doubt, being in the conservative media, you've got a target on your back. And so what have you seen the means by which the left is trying to suppress your voice, your thoughts, your perspectives getting out there?
Well, I mean, the biggest thing that I saw was over the course of COVID, because people kept talking about election, the lockdown on election discussion even, right? So if you say, hey, I think there was, I don't know if we're going to have to bleep this out if we put this on YouTube. If you say, I think there was fraud in the 2020 election, yeah, they shut that down, which is scary. But they had already been shutting people down like me who said, hey, lockdowns, there is no basis in the medical literature for the success of lockdown. In fact, if anything, it was the opposite. They had thought about this and realized you're not going to stop it. And so what are you really trying to accomplish with these maneuvers? And I think what we all saw was the Democrat power grab and a lot of things that they were trying to accomplish. It just wasn't about, eventually it became clear it wasn't about health. But they shut people down. I mean, they shut me down for talking about masks. Everything I said about masks was true. And now you have the active, not only social media suppression of conservative voices, but the New York Times did a totally BS hit piece on me, acting like I was some like vaccine conspiracy theorist or something. I was right 90% of the time about everything I said about COVID. It didn't matter to them though. And they took a cheap shot there and really were trying to go after me for saying things like, hey, maybe the vaccines don't work as well as advertised. I don't know. Let's just think about this a little bit. So you had that. You had the fact-checking industry in me, which is hilarious. I mean, this is, if you're too much of a loser to just sit there and take orders in the New York Times newsroom or something, you go work at PolitiFact, and you are effectively a propagandist for the left, pretending to be checking out, the factual basis for things. So social media, big media, Democrat Party, and the fact-checking apparatus all looking not only to suppress conservative voices, but they wanted action taken. I mean, they really did want people fired on the issue of COVID specifically being right, but it didn't matter because you weren't going along with the consensus at the time. It was terrifying. And all these journalists, I mean, terrifying, not like I'm scared of these people, but, I thought we lived in a country that was supposed to have free speech. We don't live in a country where free speech is a principle that both sides believe in. One side is fighting for it, the other side is trying to kill it.
Well, I think the left believes in the freedom of acceptable speech or accepted speech, as long as you have some, lesser version of what they have approved that can get out there, they will allow you to say it. But otherwise, this very Marxist Saul Alinsky, rules for radicals type of appeal, they will come at you, wholeheartedly. But when I look at what I see in the marketplace, do you see that there's a shift, a change, that the American people are realizing, hey, we've got to come out of this darkness?
I think it is beginning. I do think there is some cause for optimism with regard to that specific point you raise, Alan. I do believe that conservatives have actually had to undergo something of a shift in their thinking about just, I'm gonna keep my Disney Plus subscription even after I find out that Disney is trying to teach all this, sort of trans indoctrination stuff through its content. I'm going to keep watching the NBA and paying for really expensive basketball tickets, even after players, the most prominent players and the league, take very anti-law enforcement positions. Conservatives have realized, guys, they keep winning because they the left, say what you will about them, I say a lot, they do mobilize economically along their ideological lines. Now, I'm fine with a company that wants to sell toilet paper just selling toilet paper. Like, I don't actually want all companies to be politicized. Mm-hmm. But when a company that sells toilet paper says, hey, we think that our law enforcement is all racist, or hey, we think that anybody who doesn't want to have drag queen story hour for their 5-year-olds is a bigot, we either take action against that company or it just keeps getting worse. And I think that's a recognition that you've seen happen. I think Governor DeSantis in Florida, your previous Hope State, Alan, I think his fight with Disney has really awoken a sleeping giant.
Mm-hmm. No, without a doubt. And I think it's so funny that now you see Gavin Newsom advertising in the state of Florida for people to, quote unquote, come to a place where there is freedom, move to California. Hello, McFly. There are no U-Haul vans going into California. The U-Haul vans are leaving out of there. And I guess this dystopian, crazed reality bubble that they live in, because they do talk in an echo chamber. But I do believe, as you just said, that people are starting to break outside of that echo chamber. Last question, and because I know you have to go. What do you see as the future for conservative media outlets?
I'm happy to see that there are now not only a lot of people that are involved in the movement and creating their own content instead of necessarily all trying to go to the same outlets. I mean, look, I obviously I work for a very big radio company, and I have nothing but love and respect for Fox News, but I also think that the all of the above approach that we can have for people building their own, having their own voice, their own audience, I think that's all to the good. And the thing that really makes me optimistic is there's a greater awareness now that you have to be, I guess, vertically integrated might be a way to put it. You have to have a payment processor that's not anti-conservative. You have to have a platform, whether it's Rumble or Parler or Getter or these, and they're nascent still. I mean, some of them are really getting up and running more, but you think about what a world is like where we're not even beginning to put that infrastructure in place. And I think the Amazon cutting off of Parler at the knees effectively right after the 2020 election, that was a big wake-up call to people. Yes. I mean, when your web services host decides that you no longer exist on the internet and there's no consequence to them and they can just do that, you realize we can't rely on the good faith of the other side anymore. So that's all happening now. And I see some of these projects and things that Peter Thiel and some other, not even necessarily, they're not dogmatic conservatives, but just big names, people with real money to put behind these projects, that they're doing this kind of stuff makes me think that we're going to keep on increasing. That's always been my thing for conservatives, whether it's you or other people that I consider friends in the movement. Mm-hmm. I say, guys, why is anyone on the right? You got no enemies on the right in media, as far as I'm concerned, because we have such we're on this little island of media. We should be building a much bigger. Look at what they've got. Yeah. We can squabble when we have, a dozen different news channels that are all just parroting our point of view. And when we've got total control of social media platforms, then we can squabble. In the meantime, we're in the bunker together. That's how I view it.
You're absolutely right. We got to lock shields and we got to support each other. And with that being said, where can people follow you, website, your programming and everything?
Oh, thanks so much. I mean, I do a great radio show, the Clay Travis and Buck Sexton Show on Premier Networks, which I hope folks will check out. It's in the old slot that Rush Limbaugh built up into the biggest radio time slot in the country. And simple thing, if anyone wants to subscribe to this Buck Sexton Show podcast, it's a separate podcast. It's only about 20 minutes long. I kind of do a quick rundown of the day's events, and I'd love to have some folks check that out. I put it out Monday through Friday.
Well, awesome. And it is a pleasure to be on this battlefield and lock shields with you. And thank you so much for taking time to be on the Steadfast and Loyal podcast.
You too, Alan. It's been an honor. Good to see you, my friend. Talk soon.
God bless. Welcome back to the Steadfast and Loyal podcast, and now we're joined by Josh Hammer, who is an opinion editor of Newsweek, a research fellow with the Edmund Burke Foundation, counsel and policy advisor for the Internet Accountability Project, a syndicated columnist through Creators, and a contributing editor for Anchoring Truths. A frequent pundit and essayist on political, legal, and cultural issues, Josh is a constitutional attorney by training. He hosts The Josh Hammer Show, a Newsweek podcast, and co-hosts the Edmund Burke Foundation's NatCon Squad podcast. So it's Hammer time, not MC Hammer, who is also from down there in the Miami area. It's Josh Hammer time. And I just want to tell you, thank you so very much. Edmund Burke once said that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men and women to do nothing. How do you see things changing in the media aspect? Because I believe for too long, progressives, socialists, leftists, Marxists, communists, they have had a control over this media outlet. But now conservatives are starting to recognize this, and we're starting to stand up.
Well, Colonel, it's great to be with you. Thank you for all that you have done, all that you are doing, and all that you will continue to do. So, look, to your point, I am kind of in the belly of the beast here, right? I am a very outspoken. I don't hide my cards as to who I am. I have I have a voluminous right-wing track record at this point. I'm a down-the-line, hard-line conservative, but I'm working for a historically liberal brand. So, what we're trying to do in Newsweek is very interesting. If you go to our op-ed page, newsweek.com/opinion, we're not exclusively running conservative content. I am not tasked with the mission of turning Newsweek into Breitbart or the Daily Wire, which is where I used to work, actually, by the way. But we are trying to basically just air the entire spectrum of views, which in and of itself is very rare in today's media landscape, obviously. And I work with a team of 5 editors. I have 4 deputies working under my leadership, and each and every day we're trying to platform solid conservative views, and then plenty of other views that I don't personally agree with, but my editors have kind of full discretion to do whatever they want. But the media landscape is increasingly, to your point, obviously, is highly, highly fractured. In order to get kind of conservative or even kind of vaguely right of center perspectives at anything closely approaching a mainstream media source these days is very, very hard. The Wall Street Journal editorial board, is obviously center right. It's not hard right, but it's kind of, establishment Republican right. The New York Post, God bless them. I love the New York Post. And then, Newsweek and, My Little Fiefdom, we're trying to kind of basically to publish and write up center viewpoints every day, but there really aren't that many other mainstream outlets there. And what we're trying to do, and the reason it's so countercultural, I think, is because the media landscape is so bifurcating into kind of warring echo chambers, right? Very rare do you kind of see these echo chambers kind of come at each other in a legitimate exchange of ideas, try to trade ideas and policies, philosophies, and see who ultimately will triumph in the name of pursuing truth. That, in theory, is what we're trying to do, Colonel. I'm not sure that we're succeeding, but I like to think that we're making incremental progress towards trying to bring people together in this contestation of ideas. Well,
you're creating a beachhead, if I can use a military type of analogy. And from the beachhead, of course, you have to expand. But when I think about Newsweek, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was January of 2009, after Barack Obama was elected, Newsweek ran a cover that said, "We're all socialists now." Am I correct? Or was it time?
I honestly have no idea, to be totally honest with you. That was well before my time, but it would not shock me to be. That was when they were owned by the Washington Post, so it would not shock me.
And so it's amazing to me, if I do have this correct in my memory, I'm 61. I had a lot of parachute jumps, so sometimes I get a little off track. But for you to be at that same media outlet today, that's an incredible leap, an incredible step. Now, do you have these internal fights or conflicts with some of the other more woke people there at Newsweek who maybe want to try to suppress some of the things that you're saying?
So I'm probably the least popular employee at the entire company, I would guess. Going back to the very day that I was hired over 2 years ago now on May 1st, 2020. Hard to believe I've been there for over 2 years now. But on the very day that I was hired, there certainly were some people internally who sent some pretty nasty missives to the editor-in-chief and to ownership, basically objecting to my hire. There have been a couple of other mini controversies. over the past couple of years that have kind of, gotten people to rise up. There was one incident involving my friend John Eastman back in August 2020. Before John was actually a President Trump attorney, he wrote a pretty controversial op-ed that we published in Newsweek. And around that time, there was a memo where some people at the company were really deeply, deeply unhappy for me and basically looking for me to, to go the way of the dodo bird, so to speak. But, to my boss's immense credit, they have stood by me. And to their even further credit, they really have a fairly hands-off approach, honestly. I mean, I think that I have shown that I can kind of generate big names contributing, and not just big names, but quality content. I mean, this ultimately is a content-driven business. So, and the fact that I have some deputy editors who do not necessarily politically agree with me, but who are more center or even kind of center-left, I think I've shown to them that I'm intellectually honest enough to do what I am tasked to do and just platform the whole spectrum. So like you said, it is a beachhead. Newsweek, to clarify again, it will not be the next Daily Wire. It's not like a right-wing company, but it is different insofar as basically every single day you will see us airing conservative content. And then my weekly podcast, which I just started 4 or 5 months ago now with Newsweek, is an avowedly conservative podcast focused on the future of the American right and conservatism. So they really are making a concerted effort to really kind of platform conservative views. And I honestly, if you had asked me, Colonel, when I joined, if I would be there over 2 years, I probably would have laughed and said no way. But here I am, and it's going well.
Do you think they're hedging their bets a little bit? Because one of the things I think the reason why the left wants to suppress conservative thought is because they really struggle to make the case for their ideology. And when they are met with good, strong, young constitutionalists such as yourself, or we see what had just recently happened in the Supreme Court, they don't know how to combat against it other than to go into a rage and show anger. So, what do you think is the driving motive? Do they really want to show opposing thought because they know that maybe things are slipping away from them?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And you see that, of course, in the context of big tech censorship as well. I mean, if there's one thing that the left is deeply, deeply, avowedly afraid of, it is the fact that their ideas could actually go challenged, and that investigative reporters could actually get to the bottom of the things that they're saying, that in the case of the Hunter Biden laptop story from October 2020, that the media would actually report on what would look like serial misdeeds from a profoundly corrupt family. So they are deeply, deeply, deeply afraid of this. I mean, the abortion issue, which obviously has kind of risen to the forefront of the national conversation due to the Supreme Court's excellent ruling in the Dobbs case, this is actually a perfect issue. Because what the left has done for 30, 40 years is, they use what we might call the euphemistic imperative. They use euphemisms to describe what abortion is, whether it's referring to pro-choice. Well, no, it's not pro-abortion, it's pro-choice.
Women's reproductive health.
Reproductive health, reproductive freedom, clump of cells. They never talk about, obviously, the fact that this is the taking of an unborn life, because they know that when you get around the obfuscation, you take their ideas on head on, the American people are not on board with their bat crap crazy ideas. So whether that's in the big tech space or this kind of use of euphemisms, what in the abortion context or other contexts, Black Lives Matter is actually a good example of that too,
Excellent.
right? I mean,
yes.
We're not talking here about urban anarchy and just looting and destroying cities. We're talking about liberation or overcoming America's original sin of slavery, or all, it's all these various layers and layers of euphemisms, but it's all kind of geared towards the sole end of trying to avoid the heart of the matter, because they know that when conservatives can actually attack head on the heart of the matter, their ideas are going to lose in the long term.
No, you're absolutely right. And one of the things that I've told people is that, when someone confronts you and says Black Lives Matter, you don't come back and say all lives matter, because they're prepared for that. What you have to do is put the left on defense. And so I tell people, always ask them which Black Lives Matter. Right. Because when you think of the 20 to 25 million unborn Black babies murdered in the womb, nobody talks about that. The issue of fatherlessness in the Black community, no one talks about that. The Black on Black crime. I mean, right now, everyone is focused on what just happened, the shooting in Highland Park, Illinois. But no one's talking about the 77 shootings that happened just 25 miles south of there over the weekend in Chicago, where 10 people lost their lives. So, I applaud you for you doing that and bringing that up. and challenging them. Now, the other thing I'm so proud of you doing, because you and I are both kind of speakers with Young America's Foundation. I enjoy going on the college campuses and confronting these little young woke leftists who their professors are not teaching them very well. What are your experiences going on these college campuses?
Yeah, no, look, YAP is a wonderful organization. I've done a number of campus talks as well with ISI, which is another similar organization, and then also the Federal Society, because I'm actually also a lawyer by training. So, I mean, I was protested at Northwestern Law School last October, I guess it was. It was very funny. They had uncovered some tweets of mine from like 2 to 3 years ago, and they decided that I was a transphobe. So they organized kind of a transgender-oriented protest, and they had like 30 to 40 people at Northwestern Law School. They all wore black T-shirts. They held up signs. I took photos. I mean, I found the whole thing kind of amusing, to be honest with you. I was a little unnerved at one point when one of the protesters kind of approached the front of the classroom and then kind of went to go near, like, there was like a coffee jug, went to like the thing of coffee. I thought they were gonna like throw it on my shirt and try to like ruin my clothes or something. It ended up going okay, to be honest with you. But I mean, I enjoy that environment because I have nothing to hide. I mean, yeah. I am extremely open and public about what I stand for, the principles and values that I promote, and I'm fairly confident, dare I say, in the beliefs that I hold, and I'm even confident in the manner in which I'm able to express it. So whether I'm kind of outnumbered 30-on-1 or whatever, it just doesn't bother me. I think back to when I was in high school. I mean, in AP government, my senior year of high school when I was 18 years old. This is kind of during the Bush era. I mean, I kind of came up during like the Bush era, middle school and high school. I was kind of the only Bush-era Republican in my entire AP government class, taking on 25 liberals on things like Guantanamo Bay and stuff like that. So, I mean, the idea of being outnumbered in a hostile setting, let alone being protested on campus like I was last fall, it doesn't particularly faze me, to be honest with you.
No, and the same here. And it's interesting. I had an experience at Northwestern University. I was there to speak on the Iranian nuclear agreement. And the first question, young black female came up and asked me if I identified as black, which I just really said, this is dumb. But it's just sad, these are the type of things that our young people being taught. Now, when I look at you, and like I said, I'm 61, I have hope for what is out there because I see good, strong, young, intellectual conservatives such as yourself out there in the space. Are we doing well with raising that next generation of young conservatives, especially in the arena of media? Because we've got to get into the schools of communications and journalism on these college and university campuses to prevent them from just being the mill for the next leftist propaganda. So do you think that we're doing better on our college and university campuses?
Well, I think the answer is yes and no. So the yes part of that answer is, so I mentioned ISI. So ISI is among a handful of conservative organizations that helps get in there at the college level and funds right of center or these kind of contrarian, countercultural college publications. So, I went to, you mentioned Chicago. I actually lived in Chicago for 3 years. I went to University of Chicago for law school. So right now, the University of Chicago college kids, they have a thriving right of center publication called The Chicago Thinker. They're putting out fantastic content, actually, like really, really, really good stuff. So, that's a possible model because, the one thing is, as much as, college admissions offices might offer like affirmative action for liberals and progressives and discriminate against conservatives, there are inevitably going to be at least more vaguely right-of-center people on campus than the traditional college newspapers will otherwise permit. So what I'm trying to say is there's a bit of a market disorientation. So there should be a market opportunity for a well-funded, well-sourced right-of-center newspaper on a lot of campuses. The Chicago Thinker is a good example of that. So that's the yes part. And so I think we are doing a decent job. The no part is that at a higher level, at a kind of a deeper level, I tend to be pretty black-pilled, as the kids would say these days, about higher education in America. I really think it is as bad in general as people say it is. And I think that the only kind of viable mid to long-term solution is to deprive them of every single penny of taxpayer dollar, but to even go further than that, to ultimately really deprive them of legitimacy. And I think conservatives, our side, Colonel, I think we're going to have to make some really hard decisions about whether or not we really want our kids to go to these woke madrasas of leftist indoctrination. I mean, look, I feel very blessed and privileged. I went to great schools. I went to Duke and the University of Chicago. But look, my children growing up, I mean, if they're brilliant to get into Princeton or Harvard, do I really want to send them there? I mean, these are hard questions to ask, but I think the times are going to have to call for that, because not only is it very expensive, but what are you ultimately sending them there for? I mean, just to get exposed to people talking about like lesbian dance theory and critical race theory. I mean, like where does the madness stop? So it's kind of a two-pronged answer to your question, I think.
You know, you bring up a great point, because I've often talked to people about there should be a Hillsdale College in every state in the United States of America. But another thing that I look at, you know, my ideological mentor is Booker T. Washington. And I think about how he, you know, first founded Tuskegee Normal Industrial Institute. We've got to start investing our money, like you just talked about, ISI going in and supporting these, you know, right of center newspapers on these college and university campuses. There are so many historical black colleges and universities that are struggling right now. And I think that, you know, why don't we have philanthropists on the conservative side that are going in and, you know, buying some of these universities, philanthropists that are going in and buying some of these failing newspapers, and really starting a conservative media, you know, consortium, because it's a system that we have to start looking at. The system of education that feeds into it, the online, the magazines and periodicals, the newspapers and all of that. So what are your thoughts on how we can really vertically and horizontally integrate conservative philosophy of governance into the media?
It's a good question. I mean, one place where we can start there, this is kind of an active debate that I've had with a lot of friends, law school friends and whatnot, is I think there has to be a debate as to whether political identity, political philosophy, political party, whoever you want to describe it, should actually be added to the Civil Rights Act. So, you know, I think generations of conservatives have discussed, and they're not necessarily wrong about this, about just at this point, you know, the Civil Rights Act has gone too far, perhaps. This is Chris Caldwell from the Claremont Institute, wrote a great book on this, about how the Civil Rights Act has been weaponized, and he's not wrong about any of that. The problem is that it's not necessarily going anywhere. So at this point, shouldn't we at least want to protect conservatives, who at this point are basically the most discriminated against group in America? I mean, I feel confident saying that. I literally do not think that there is any group in America right now that is discriminated against worse than political conservatives across kind of like the racial, sexual, immigration status, any of them, right? So I'm not sure exactly what way that cuts as far as making inroads into kind of the media or the universities or Hollywood, Silicon Valley or anything, but at a bare minimum, it should make sure that these kind of HR departments, at least in kind of the private sector, as the woke capital, you know, Gramscian march to the institutions continues, at a bare minimum, these HR departments should know that they cannot openly discriminate against conservatives in the hiring process. So that ultimately should trickle down and have some salutary effects in the media itself. You know, you mentioned journalism school earlier. I have to think that's probably a losing proposition. I mean, I'm the opinion editor of a major publication. I have never taken a formal journalism class in my life, to be honest with you. Yeah. I'm not really sure it would have benefited me, but you know, I should say that. I mean, I do have some deputy editors who have some formal journalism training, but there's realistically speaking just no way that conservatives are ever going to make inroads in journalism schools. I think we have to take kind of a burn it all down approach to that, the same way that we should take that approach to probably to higher education in general.
So, looking forward, where do you see yourself as a prominent young constitutionalist and conservative voice? And who are some of the other, you know, bright members, let's say, in your class that are coming along? Because one of the things that my generation has to do, we've got to pass that torch of liberty and freedom to you all to continue this fight. We got to set the conditions for your success. So who do you see those bright, shining stars out there?
Well, you know, there's any number of organizations, any number of individuals that I look to and consider kind of close allies in this fight. So, you know, I mean, I could rattle off some names, I suppose. I mean, you know, in my bio that you graciously read, I mean, I'm the co-host of the NatCon Squad podcast at the Edmund Burke Foundation. My three co-hosts there, Ben Weingart and Rachel Bovard, Emily Jashinsky, are all absolutely fantastic. Sohrab Ahmari, the former op-ed editor of the New York Post, currently a co-founder of a new publication called Compact, is a good friend and I think kind of ideological ally of mine in many ways here. Yoram Hazony, who's the chairman of the Emmenberg Foundation. He's very influential, I think, on the way that I approach the world and more generally how I approach kind of the future of the American right and the right of center, globally speaking, in general here. The Blaze, based right there in Texas, I think has a number of excellent young talents. Allie Beth Stuckey's a host there, who's a friend of mine. Steve Dace up in Iowa, I think is fantastic. So there are a number of us out there. Michael Knowles, my former colleague at the Daily Wire, he's fantastic. Matt Walsh. So look, there are a bunch of us, I think, who kind of form kind of, I mean, not everyone obviously who's young is on the same page as me as far as everything that I'm saying or doing. But there's one way that I can kind of subscribe kind of the brand and approach to conservatism that I'm trying to do. I am basically just trying to tell my fellow conservatives that the culture has been arrayed against us for 50 to 60 years. For 50 to 60 years, we've just been pleading live and let live, neutrality, just give us our space, let us kind of, go to church, synagogue, let us do our thing in private. And the more that we just plead for tolerance, the more that they just take over all of the institutions, the universities, the media. So we have to go on offense. And in red states like Texas, Florida, Tennessee, we need strong-willed governorship, like I have here in Florida, thank God, to Governor DeSantis. We need people to actually go on offense and actually kind of reward our political friends and punish our political enemies, similar to the way that Governor DeSantis did to the Walt Disney Company actually in April. That's a good example of the kind of strong-willed conservatism. So, whether it's folks like me, Chris Rufo would be another excellent example of a young, enterprising conservative who I think very much is on the offense as far as the culture war. But younger conservatives in particular, Colonel, I think we understand that at this point in the year 2022, with the Republic increasingly hanging on, sometimes it seems by, very much on the brink, every issue is a culturally and civilizationally salient issue. The time for kind of Wall Street Journal editorial board tax cuts, look, I don't like taxes, obviously, but like the idea that tax cuts are going to solve our problems right now, total nonsense. Every issue right now is about fighting to preserve our culture and our civilization and our sense of the American way of life.
No, you are absolutely spot on. And one of the things I always say is that you don't win on defense. You've got to go on offense. And even if you have a successful defense, you got to counterattack. And Andrew Breitbart once said that politics flows downstream of the culture. And I think that's where we have to get engaged. But the problem that I have seen is that Republicans, conservatives, however you want to say it, we don't have the same type of killer instinct that the other side has. Right. And I'm not talking about going out and shooting and killing. I'm talking about defeating and destroying your opposition. We don't see that. And my prayer is that if the Republicans win the House and the Senate, we will see that type of fighter and that type of killer instinct that they can do through policy and legislation and hearings and what have you. Not that, we got to go and shackle people like they just did Peter Navarro in the airport, but we got to make them believe that we will. Because right now they don't have that. They don't have a fear of us, I don't think. Closing thoughts.
No, not at all. And look, I would only echo that sentiment and go further, I guess. I mean, so Abigail Shrier, who's done amazing work on the transgender issue, she had a recent Substack post. I don't remember the title of the post, but the subtitle was "In Defense of Political Escalation." And Abigail is a friend of mine. She's brilliant. I think that she is kind of an ex kind of live and let live style classical liberal who's been mugged by reality a little bit. Because even if kind of live and let live style classical liberalism is the end goal, the pendulum has been so warped. It has been so distorted. It is now swinging so far to the left that some sort of prudential escalation of our tactics is called for simply to right the ship. And again, that does not mean, obviously, God forbid, anyone actually physically getting violent, obviously. But it does mean, at a bare minimum, that when Republicans are actually in power in elected office, or when conservatives are in power in the private sector, whether it's the media, the university, or whatever, to actually use that power to put forward a vision of the good. And, again, I think Governor DeSantis' leadership here in Florida is just a very good example of that in general. Yeah, look, I obviously agree with you. I mean, even if the goal is some sort of kind of live and let live liberalism, we have to fight back harder simply to get that pendulum back toward the center at a bare minimum.
You're right. When tolerance becomes a one-way street, it leads to cultural suicide. So, Josh, where can people follow you? Your primary websites, the NatCon podcast. Let us know.
Sure. Yeah. So you can follow me on Twitter, Josh_Hammer. So my podcast, The Josh Hammer Show, is on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Ditto for NatCon Squad. You can find that on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And then go ahead and check out newsweek.com/opinion. That's the opinion section that I run every day, which we were talking about earlier. And you'll find my weekly syndicated columns that appear there. But we're publishing any number of very interesting writers on a daily basis there as well.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the Steadfast and Loyal podcast, and you and your cohorts do represent the future for conservatism in the media outlets. So God bless you, and thanks so much.
God bless you, Colonel. Thank you.
Take care, Josh. Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to Steadfast and Loyal podcast, and now I am joined by Jack Posobiec. He is the senior editor of Human Events, a political news and analysis outlet founded in 1944, one of our oldest. Jack served as a Washington, D.C. correspondent at OAN and is a veteran intelligence officer of United States Navy, anchors away. With multiple deployments, including Guantanamo Bay, place I've been to, and also East Asia. He got to see all the great, nice places, but us Army guys, we only saw the desert and what have you. So, Jack, thanks so much for joining us here at the Steadfast and Loyal podcast. How are you?
Well, I appreciate that, Colonel. And I should mention, by the way, that, when I was served at Guantanamo Bay, that I was actually attached to a National Guard unit. So I was an individual augmentee from my Navy unit as an intel guy down to, and this is prior when I was enlisted, down to Guantanamo. So I was there with my big green, all my big green boys and girls, my friends over there. And actually was able to earn, I don't know how many people in the Navy have this, but I've got an Army Achievement Medal out of that. So some people, cool. So when they see my ribbon rack, they say, "Yeah, I thought you were a Navy officer. What are you doing with that Army medal there?" I said, well,
at least you were there. It still was beachfront property, something that you don't see very often in the United States Army.
Absolutely.
And, I'm very blessed in that, you see here on my collar, I have the Navy Marine Corps parachuters insignia. I had 3 years selected to do an exchange with the Marines down at Camp Lejeune, and so I was able to earn my Navy Marine Corps Gold Wings. So
I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what it's all about. We can joke each other and everything like that, but when it comes to the fight for liberty and freedom, we're all on the same team, Team America.
Of course.
So, Jack, I just want to start off. Thank you for resuscitating Human Events. Like I said, one of the oldest, maybe the oldest conservative media outlets out there. So what was the inspiration for you to go in and take over Human Events? And what is kind of like your direction? What's your vision for Human Events right now?
Well, thank you, Colonel. I really appreciate that. And I, of course, it's an absolute honor to be on the podcast here with you. When I look at Human Events as a property and as something that, even when I was first getting into conservative media and listening to it, just as a fan, as somebody who was going to school and, we'd listen to Rush during my lunch breaks, that kind of thing. And Rush would always read from Human Events and other sources as well. But I really liked what Human Events had as a brand. And then somewhere along the line, and you saw this across media, really, that a lot of the legacy media outlets that were print-based, magazines, newspapers, they didn't really make the jump to digital. And so there were a lot of these properties out there that have huge archives, huge names, huge reputations, but for one reason or another had never quite made it into the digital age. And so when myself, and not just me, but also a group of people at the time, we're looking at Human Events as a property, we realized that, here's something that's got incredible name ID, incredible backstory, great legacy, right? People know of it as the sort of Ronald Reagan's favorite paper. And so the story that we were told, right, we get told this again and again, and we actually tracked down, we did an interview with some of the original editors of Human Events, some of the guys who are still around, and they told us that it was sort of in the Reagan White House, because you had Bush as the vice president, Bush Sr., and Reagan's the president, that the sort of the Bush team that was in there, they didn't want Reagan reading Human Events. They said, no, you can't read that rag. That's the grassrootsy, that's the conservative, what you might call that the Tea Party or populist, kind of wing of the party today. So don't be reading that. But Reagan would always look at me and say, well, I need my human events. It's that time of the week. I need it. And so he would always people would have to sneak it into the Oval Office there. And I said, man, that's not such a great story. And also a connection line between the conservative movement. And we've seen so many times that the establishment will move to kind of push, the movement conservatives, whether you be pro-life, whether you be pro-national security, push those kind of conservatives out in favor of sort of your establishment conservative types. And we see that same dynamic still playing out today. But we needed to put human events back into the mix. And so we realized that there was a huge also vacancy on the right to position an online commentary forum where you are getting that nationalist, populist, new right message. Because you saw people, a lot of these guys in 16, they made the wrong call. They came out against Trump. They came out against the movement. They didn't like the way things were going. They said, this guy's going to lose. He's never going to give us Supreme Court justices. He'll be a liberal. And, we know what the history is, right? And so we're unabashed that we are the home of the new right, which is also sort of tongue in cheek because, as you said, the outlet's been around since 1944. There's not much new about it, right? But we're injecting some of these new ideas, which are actually old ideas, right? But we're also putting it into the digital space. So I've got a daily podcast where I just do 25 minutes. Actually, you would appreciate this. It's basically a commander's update brief, right? Awesome. 25 minutes a day, boom, boom, boom. The hot stories, a little bit of analysis. Same thing that they train me to do in military intelligence, right? Here's what's important, sir. Here's what's on the horizon. Here, situation, action, outcome. Boom, done. Move on to the next. And then we just do that. So we get a lot of those, sort of executives, a lot of people in Congress that listen to it because they don't have time to watch a lot of different things. And then we're also moving back into the commentary section. So, Colonel, we'd love to have you, by the way, if you're interested in writing some op-eds. If you have any opinions that you'd be interested to share.
I'm a pretty milquetoast guy. I don't have
pretty milquetoast guy.
Yeah, I don't have any really positions on anything. Well, it's interesting that you bring up Ronald Reagan because Reagan had that 3-point of conservatism. It was fiscal conservatism, national security, and social conservatism.
That's right.
And it's interesting because you're right. So often we have heard, people in the GOP establishment saying, we don't want to talk about that social conservatism stuff. We're not going to win with that. And now all of a sudden we have a constitutionally based Supreme Court. And look at the decisions that they have come out with.
Yes.
It's not a decision saying we hate abortion. It's a decision saying this is where it belongs. This is where a decision should be. And it is getting back to understanding the Constitution and the right roles, responsibilities, purviews, and jurisdictions of the federal government. It's about reestablishing federalism. And so I think that that's a great thing. And so how does Human Events look at some of these recent decisions and get that ideal back out there? The 10th Amendment, all of those powers not designated or delegated to the federal government are reserved to the states and to the people. Because I think that's where we need the education.
Right, and that's your 10th Amendment, and that's I've even had people on the right reach out to me and say, "Can you tell me if the Roe v. Wade decision has exceptions for the life of the mother or the provisions for ectopic pregnancies, et cetera?" This, and I said, "Whoa,
yeah,
that's not what's been done at all, right? The Roe v. Wade decision was a decision that took this contentious ideal and this contentious issue out of the hands of the voters and said, you cannot, right? We're going to put a line in the sand that you're not allowed to cross regardless of what state you are. And we're going to protect it as if it were a constitutional right along the lines of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, or the Second Amendment. For example, you cannot ban, right, a church in the United States. It's impossible. You cannot do this under the Constitution. And it would sound crazy to suggest that you could. But something like abortion, it is simply not written. And really the way we look at this is that decision was sort of the pinnacle of the 60s counterculture, the sexual revolution, coming up through the 70s, intertwined with the feminist movement, where they essentially whole cloth created a constitutional right, took the decision out of the hands of the people, took it out of the hands of the voters, took it out of the hands of the states, and said, you're not even allowed to decide whether or not you should have a say in this. And so when I hear people saying this is a, anti-democracy, I say, no, it's the exact opposite of that, because this was the system that our founders understood would make the most sense, is that when you have the power localized as much as possible, as close to the people as possible, then you get the best decisions. That's actually what the Supreme Court said, and that's what they did. And I agree with you. I picked up what you were saying there, that we have a court now, really, Thomas is the senior member. And I think with him there and being able to have majorities now in so many of these questions, if you bring up other cases or other laws and look at different things that have been passed by these activist courts since the 1970s, right? Thomas is essentially saying, we will revisit these things. And if there are things that are going on that countermand our Constitution, then we will fight back against them. And that's where Human Events comes down on it, is that we want to follow the system the way it was set up, not the system the way that it was altered in the 1960s, where you have these bureaucrats and civil servants and academia kind of running the government, and the politicians are there just like some kind of window dressing.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because, we don't have a court institution. We have a constitution.
That's right.
And, you look at that decision about the EPA. You cannot, as a bureaucrat, just come up and decide that you have the power to implement rules and regulations against the people, against businesses, based upon an ideological agenda. So I see this is, it's crazy. But the thing is that we have not had that voice of conservatism out there in the media to challenge these things. And now we do have a constitutional court. And so that's where you find, Human Events. And we're talking off camera about, I believe that the left sees a 3 branches of rule: the media, academia, and the courts. And for whatever reason, we as conservatives have shied away from that. And now we're starting to, they're concerned about losing the Supreme Court. Now they want to pack it. And now we're starting to see you and many other young conservatives. I just got finished talking with Josh Hammer. I'm sure you know him very well.
Oh, good friend. Yeah.
Yeah. But you guys are the vanguard. I told him it's kind of like a beachhead. You guys are landing on the beach, and you're going to expand this thing in a completely different direction, because the old ways aren't working anymore. And I think you would agree with that.
Well, I would agree. And I obviously there's, with people like Rush, like yourself, like so many others that have laid down this path for us, that have really done so much of the early groundwork of explaining to people the issues in our system, the corruption that exists out there, the fact that we've gotten so far away from first principles, so far away from the system that our founders gave us. We just had the 4th of July, right? And so this is a day where, we're told that we're not even supposed to celebrate our country anymore, that the celebrities are telling people to wear black because of America is this evil country. It was always, evil from the start. And we know what this is about. This is their project. And they've been working on this for 100 years at this point, to unravel what our founders did, the miracle that the founding fathers instituted. You can say July 4th, 1776. And how amazing is it that America has a birthday, right? Not every country has a birthday like that you can point to and say, yeah, that's the day. And so that's the point where we started a new country, right? We had a lot of problems that we had to deal with from the old country. We worked on it. We're still working on it in some cases, but we put together this system that stands alone among the countries of the world, stands alone, and stands head and shoulders above them. And you need to combat the false propaganda so much that's going on in our schools, in many cases now that's going on in the workplace, that's going on in corporations. The financial world is seeing a lot of this, and that's a whole
ESG,
obviously separate
the
topic.
ESG movement,
but I should say, I can't reveal yet, but we have an interesting op-ed that's been written by somebody who I think a lot of people know, that's been fighting that fight on the front lines. And it's the first time that, I will say this, that she has been published anywhere. And so I think when that one comes out, a lot of people are going to like to see it. So we're trying to really be a place where we're the front page of the new right. We're the home of the new right, where the new right lives. We will be there. If you're fighting the fight, whatever one of these beachheads it is, we're the place to come in. You can get a great commentary on it. You can learn, right? We'll do the analysis. We'll be breaking news as well. And we've also joined into, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with this one as well, they're a newer blog, but they're called the Post Millennial. Have you heard of Post Millennial?
I have, absolutely.
Well, so Human Events actually purchased the Post Millennial because we realized that what they were doing so great was breaking news, moving at the speed of Twitter, which is really the speed of lightning, right? The speed of fireworks, that they were doing so well. And that was a core competency that Human Events didn't have, because Human Events is known more for long form opinion pieces. Now we're putting those two brands together. We're not going to change the name of them or anything, but so it expands our bench, expands our team, and then gives us that breaking news wing where we're breaking the news on one end, and then we've got the commentary and the opinion and the analysis on the Human Events side.
Well, I think that's great because you can look across the spectrum of media outlets, and you will find truth in some places, and you will find, I don't know what it is, in some other places. And I think that's undermining our constitutional republic, because it is purposeful and intentional. I'll give you a great case in point. When you have the Secretary of Homeland Security on a media outlet, and he's sitting there saying, we're doing good at the border. Maybe, because you want to have this flooding of people coming across, but we need to have those checks and balances in the media. And I believe in the freedom of the press, but I don't want to see an ideological press. I want to see a press that tells the truth to the American people. We don't have that. Another thing that I think you and I can share concerns about, Army, soldier, sailor, what we see happening in our military is very disconcerting. And we need to have more people that are writing and talking about it. Because when you all of a sudden have the service chiefs that are going out there and saying, we need you all to talk to young people about the military because they're not joining, we're not hitting our recruitment goals. Well, if you're talking cultural Marxism in the military, there's not a whole lot of people that want to be there. So what will Human Events do to kind of expose some of the issues? Because we took an oath to the Constitution in the military. I don't see many people at the senior level leadership in the military honoring that oath to the Constitution.
Well, when it comes to the military, something that hits me very close to home when I look at it from the Navy side also was the USS Bonhomme Richard.
Yes.
And the fact that we had a dock landing ship, which is essentially, it's not quite an aircraft carrier, but maybe 80% of the way to an. Oh, you're on it?
I was on it. Yeah, I was on it when I was signed with the Marines out there on the West Coast. Beautiful ship.
Oh, so that's what you did. When you're on West. Wow, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
So so they would have been through Lejeune and San Diego, et cetera. And so you have a ship and if people don't know the story, it comes down to that this ship was docked to port. It was undergoing refits, repairs, upgrades, all the wonderful things that we do when we're in port. And a fire broke out. They have charged someone with arson, a young, it was an E1 sailor with this. We're not entirely sure if it was him, though. That case is still pending. So, but the point is that being able to fight the fire on a ship, right? When you're out at sea, there's no 911, right? Obviously. So when the fire breaks out at ship, this is something that sailors have known how to do for thousands of years, actually thousands of years, fighting fires at sea. And so we've always set this, and we know, because if you're a sailor, fire will destroy you and everything you love. That's it. That's the end, full stop. Colonel, there was a ship that was on fire on the pier, and the sailors on board weren't able to put out the fire. And the Navy determined that it was due to a lack of training and a lack of understanding how to use the fire suppression systems on board the ship when that fire broke out. And so when I see a situation like that, and then I look at the CCP and I look at how the CCP has their eyes set on Taiwan, on those semiconductors, on the international shipping lanes that are just off of China or just off of Taiwan in the South China Sea, I look at a Navy where I say, look, if you want to deter China from doing any of these things, right, then the way you need to do that is fix the Navy. The same way that if you want to deter aggression in Europe or the Middle East, wherever, right, you fix the Army so you create a credible deterrence threat so that no one will even think of raising their finger to cross any of those lines. No one would even dream of doing that. And that was, to go back to Reagan, that was the 600 ship Navy of Ronald Reagan's United States Navy. And the same idea, speak softly and carry a big stick, that goes all the way back to Teddy Roosevelt. We've lost that somewhere along the way. Mm-hmm. And so it's understanding that the job of the military, first and foremost, and far be it for a junior lieutenant to say this to a colonel, is to hurt people, break stuff, and protect the people back home. Right? That's
you're
the job
absolutely
of the
right.
military.
Peace through strength.
And everything else is just nice to have, right? But if you can't accomplish those missions from day one, from moment one, when I was in, they called it PACOM at the time, but the slogan was "Ready to Fight Tonight." And if I had to go to the JCS right now, I'd have to say, sirs, we are not ready to fight tonight. We're not ready. And I think it goes to, and you look at the Osprey incidents that we've had, the MV-22s, it feels like once a month we're having one of these things fall out of the skies, and you're seeing more and more of this, and people are being killed. Marines are being killed in those accidents. And so it's a service-wide problem. It's an armed forces-wide problem. And so human events, we've got whistleblowers in many of the services. People that I served with are reaching out to me on a regular basis, telling me, they said, the retention's bad because these vaccine mandates were going completely crazy. Oh, actually, one thing that I do appreciate that President Trump said, I haven't heard any other politician say this, by the way, but President Trump said that if he becomes president again, that he will take those troops that were kicked out over the vaccine mandate, and he will reinstate them if they want to go back in at the exact same rank and with back pay. And with back pay. I said, that's just like, it's just from a political perspective, right? Even if you're not a Trump supporter, you have to admit that's a pretty good political statement to make, right?
No, it's a fantastic statement because
nobody else in the entire country has even thought to say this.
Well, that order that Joe Biden gave, which was in the middle of the debacle in Afghanistan, that we were going to have mandated vaccines. That order for the military was unethical, it's immoral, it's illegal, and no one should have to follow orders that are along those lines. To tell people they have to take an experimental drug. Now, you and I deployed to places, we got it, and we had to take whatever vaccines to make sure we were protected.
Vaccine alley.
That vaccine alley. But a virus that has a 99.95% recovery rate, that is not a detriment to our United States military. As a matter of fact, we have seen more problems from the vaccine in the military with a lot of our young people with the heart issues and what have you. So I am so happy that you guys are bringing that out, because we can't trust this media to talk about any of those things. And that affects our national security. You're right. China, Iran, North Korea, the Islamic jihadists we're seeing a resurgence between Al-Qaeda and ISIS or whatever. So I'm glad that human events will continue to honor that pillar of Ronald Reagan of national security conservatism.
And Colonel, if I could add one thing about our philosophy in this, is that we don't view ourselves as the owners of human events. We view ourselves as the stewards of human events. We didn't start this, and we won't be the ones who end it either. We fully intend that at some point, we will be the ones passing the baton along, and it's just our job right now to manage it, to steward it, and then restore it to its former glory, and then being able to hand it off to people that we find who will also take upon that same mantle of responsibility. That's how we view everything when we put the human events name on it.
Well, that's great. And I want everyone to understand, since we just celebrated our Independence Day, that the title of your media outlet comes from the very opening sentence of the Declaration of Independence, when in the course of human events. Mm-hmm. And that's where we are right now. So, Jack, where can people follow you and follow Human Events, and how can they make sure they get a subscription to your outlet?
Well, thank you so much, Colonel. You can follow. So my daily podcast is we call it Human Events Daily. It's sort of the flagship podcast. It's out every morning, 25 minutes or less. I call it a podcast for people who don't like podcasts or don't have time for podcasts. Then also, of course, humanevents.com. And then we'll have a huge setup down at the Turning Point Student Action Summit coming up this summer, the end, I think in 2 weeks actually. Yeah, because today's the 5th. So it starts 22nd to 24th. We'll have President Trump. We'll have Governor DeSantis, the only event this summer that's actually got both of them on the same stage. You can check that out, tpusa.com/SASS. And if you see us, come say hi.
That's awesome. And I want to thank you again for your service in the United States Navy. And we need more young men and women who have been willing to make the last full measure of devotion and take that oath to the Constitution to be in these critical leadership positions for conservatism in the United States of America. So, Jack, thank you so much, and call upon me anytime. I'm ready to lock shields with you in this fight.
All right. God bless, Colonel. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be on.
You. Awesome. Have a great night.
You too.
Hey, thanks, everyone, for taking the time to tune into the Steadfast and Loyal podcast. We got a problem with a propagandized media in the United States of America. Like I said, I support the freedom of the press, but I want the press to report the truth to the American people, not to try to manipulate them and not become that Pravda-like press. We know what's going on our border. It's not going well, and they need to be called out on that. We know the reason why we have the high gasoline prices. Need to be called out and held accountable. We know what is happening with our national security and our foreign policy. We know that we have gone into an economic recession. And so we need to make sure that we have those voices out there. And I'm so proud that we have those young voices in very critical positions that can get that message out to the people, and especially to the young people. Because we cannot be the first generation that passes on less to subsequent generations, but we're on the cusp of seeing that happen in the United States of America. Remember that our mission here at the Steadfast and Loyal podcast is to make sure you're better informed, better educated, so that you can be better activated. And you can go out and you can challenge the progressive socialist Marxist left on all of these issues. And when they start to yell and scream and froth at the mouth, you're winning the debate. Don't retract, don't retreat, but press on. Because we can only win if we're on offense. If you like the podcast, please hit that like button and share it with others, because we want to make sure that we can get this word out all across the United States of America. Thanks so very much to executive producer Lisa, producer Chad, all the staff members of the Steadfast and Loyal podcast, and to my dear friend CW3 Ryan Weaver for our theme music. We'll see you next week on the Steadfast and Loyal podcast.
Before they burn it down.